Good morning, church. Good morning. It's really good to be here. I'm Robert Carter. I've driven all the way from the west side of Atlanta to get here. And I have a giant problem. And my problem is I've got about 5 or 6 hours of material to present to you in 50 minutes. So I'm just going to skip over almost everything I have to say. And if I don't hit a thing that you might be wondering about, it's because I try to hit every other thing that I had to say. And I can't possibly squish it together that fast. So I'm already stumbling over myself. I should slow down. I'm a professional speaker, but it's really, really, really difficult to convey something so amazing as dinosaurs. So all I'm going to do then is I'm just going to ask you some questions. And as we go through this, let's see if we can answer the questions. Let's see if we can answer the questions scripturally. And at the end, if we can say, yeah, the Bible does a really good job of answering those questions, we can actually conclude the Bible is a good source of history and science. But we can't do that until we ask the questions. Okay, so first question. Which of these creatures have been on earth the longest? The bird, the dinosaur, the dolphin, or the fish? Who says dinosaur? Who says fish? Bird, dolphin? None of the above? You see, this is a trick question. We see questions like this all the time. The question there is a leading question. It's assuming that some of these things have been on earth longer than others. Now, Charles Darwin taught us, of course, fish came first, and then dinosaurs, and then reptiles and mammals. But what does the Bible have to say? Well, the Bible gives us a very different history. It says that God created everything in 6 days, consecutively, a little more than 6,000 years ago. Now, uncomfortable as that may seem, this is the biblical claim. And the Bible clearly says that God created all the flying critters and all the swimming critters one day before all the land animals. So the bird, the dolphin, and the fish should be a day older than the dinosaur. Oh, that's not what I was taught in school, is it? But what's a dinosaur? You know, as a kid, I remember reading all those passages in the Old Testament about people that live for hundreds of years. I said, well, what if an iguana lived for like 800 years? Would that turn into a Spinosaurus? The answer is no, absolutely not. Because, thank you. We have baby dinosaurs, we have medium-sized dinosaurs, and we have full-grown dinosaurs. We know what they look like as juveniles. The other reptiles are different. So now a dinosaur, whether it had 2 legs or 4 legs, it basically stood up. All the other reptiles alive, except for snakes, turtles, alligators, their legs stick out to the side. So there's a fundamental difference. This is a unique group of reptiles. But the crazy thing about this is that buried with dinosaurs are all of the other types of reptiles that you're familiar with. All of them. And so we must ask the question, what happened to the dinosaurs? Now, the big story is a big meteor hit the Earth, they say 65 million years ago. And I don't think the Earth is that old, but fine. They say 65 million years ago, a big meteor hit the Earth, and a big dust storm, basically enveloped the whole world, cooled off the world, and the dinosaurs died. Okay, great. How come the butterfly survived? When we ask questions like those are curveball questions. Those sorts of questions are never addressed in science class or on the National Geographic Channel because they're too uncomfortable. But let's get into some of the science here. This is really amazing stuff. Look at this. My question is, how many different dinosaurs were there? I bet amongst us we might be able to name 10 species of dinosaur. Tyrannosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Brontosaurus, which, by the way, is now, again, a Brontosaurus. Brontosaurus didn't exist. The person who discovered Brontosaurus found it in rocks and found another head of a different dinosaur miles away, and they stuck it on the animal and put it in the museum, and it was there for 100 years before anyone said, hey, that's the wrong head. And so they demoted Brontosaurus, but recently they've resurrected again. So even without the head, they said, okay, look, it's different enough from the other sauropods, we'll call it its own genus again. Science is funny, isn't it? So tell me, how many species of dinosaurs are here? Well, I count 11. This is some of the ceratopsid dinosaurs. Microceratops, protoceratops are not on this list. There's a whole bunch of other ceratopsids. But look at them. They're all similar in some ways, right? They have a beak, they have some sort of a frill, they have some horns. So we can group them together into a group called the ceratopsids. The problem is, I don't know how many species are here. I know that Charles Darwin said that species change very slowly over millions of years, and so to get that much difference in an evolutionist's mind, it would take a very long time. But how many species are standing here on the grass? That's the world's largest dog standing next to the world's smallest dog. We know species can change. Look what we did. But we also know that within each group of species, there's a lot of diversity and potential for morphing. Now, a dog's not going to turn into a cat. I don't believe in evolution. But I do believe the species can change over time. That is true. There it is. And yet, I know that if a paleontologist found bones of these animals in the fossil record, he would never call them the same species. So how many dinosaur species are there? I don't know. They're dead. We can't breed them. We can't genetically test them. We don't know. But if we look at the fossil record and put these thoughts together, there's only about 50 basic kinds of dinosaur. And you're familiar with most of them. So 50, it's actually not that hard to figure out, or it's not that hard to get a grasp of most of the diversity within the dinosaurs. If you group it into 50 groups, you can learn about the theropods and the sauropods and ankylosaurs. It's interesting that buried with dinosaurs, we have found as many species of mammals as there are species of dinosaurs. They've known the mammals were there for well over 100 years, but no one studied them. In fact, there's some world-class bone beds that were destroyed in the 1800s by paleontologists looking for the big dinosaurs to bring back to the museums in Chicago and New York. And they dug through the stuff and threw all the stuff away. Now paleontologists are going back to those sites and picking up the broken rocks and looking at all the mammals and the other baby dinosaurs and other things that they just assumed weren't there, and they dug right through them. How large were dinosaurs? Well, it depends. Yeah, that Amphicoelius fragilis, he's about 200 feet long. But all they found was a giant vertebra. And based on the vertebra, like, wow, this animal must have been. And yet, within the sauropods, there are full-grown sauropods that are about the size of a dog. So how big were dinosaurs? I have no idea. It depends on which one you're talking about. But see, that gets to the question of how could Noah fit dinosaurs on the ark, right? Well, it all depends on which ones he took. We'll get to that in a second. What did dinosaurs eat? Look at Tyrannosaurus rex with the 6-inch long teeth. How would he have originally been described? Is he an herbivore? Is he a carnivore? Is he a scavenger? An omnivore? Who says carnivore? The fierce predator stalking those Mesozoic plains looking for his prey. Well, there's a couple difficulties with this. First of all, his teeth aren't anchored in very well. If he got in a fight, his teeth would break off. Second of all, he's so large he probably couldn't run because he generates so much heat from running that his blood would boil. So he could definitely walk. I mean, he could stalk anyway, but running, that Jurassic Park movie was certainly not true. Okay, but here's something else crazy about this thing, though. We know the Bible says that God created all things to eat plants. This is true, right here. God talking to Adam. I've given you every herb that yields seed which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food, also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life. I've given every green herb for food, and it was so. You've read that before, right? How come in the fossil record we know there was things eating meat? If God created all things to eat plants, is there not a giant conflict between what the Bible claims and what science tells us? Yeah, there is at first. We have to acknowledge, there's a conflict here. Let's address it. Let's see if we can figure it out. And what we do is we keep digging. So I'm trying to get to here. The theropods are the meat eaters. Most dinosaurs were vegetarians. But the theropods, that's the tyrannosaurs, the velociraptor, the guys with those little front legs. There's a revolution happening in paleontology today. It's actually really exciting. Back in the day, they would find the bones in the rocks and chisel the rock away and take the bones out and bring it back to their museum or their laboratory. But today, they realize that very often associated with the bones are what are called ghost fossils. Very often, you can see the outline of the animal's body that has discolored the rock because he was buried entirely whole. And when you look at that, wow, that's where his heart was. There's his liver. That's his stomach. And when scientists started taking the stomach contents of the so-called carnivorous dinosaurs, cutting them in half and looking at them in a microscope, like, wow, look at this. This animal's stomach was packed with plant material. That's not supposed to be true. Well, let me give you another example of a fierce predator, the brown bear. Now, wait a minute. You ever look at bears? You realize that brown bears and polar bears have the same tools, right? They have the same claws. They have the same teeth. Those teeth that a black bear can sit and take a blueberry bush and go like this and strip all the blueberries off it, those are really good for eating seals. Those claws that black bears use to dig up roots are really good for grabbing something out of the ice. It's the same tool set. Bears were originally designed to eat plants. Some of them left their original station and started eating meat. In fact, the world's largest bear ever discovered in the fossil record was just a year ago. They announced it was a giant cave bear they found in Europe. And when they looked at the mineral composition of the teeth and the isotopes in the teeth, they said, wow, this guy was an herbivore. And it was a big shock. So, how come we know some dinosaurs eating meat? Because some dinosaurs' stomachs are packed with crunched up bones. Baby dinosaurs, they found birds in dinosaur stomachs. We know that they were eating meat, but it's only a minority of them. And the same ones that are eating meat with their pointy teeth, we also know we're eating plants with their pointy teeth. So we got to be careful with science. Science is fickle, and it will change right out from underneath us. But we do know that they were eating meat. This is a Tyrannosaurus rex tooth embedded in a hadrosaur. It's a duck-billed dinosaur's tailbone. And the bone is healed up around the tooth. So that animal survived a Tyrannosaurus attack that drove a tooth deep into its vertebra. He walked around the rest of his life in tremendous pain. There's a lot of bad stuff happening in the fossil record. I'll get more into my second talk. I just skipped over a little bit. My second talk, I'm going to talk about the curse, the application of the curse on the world, why suffering, death, and bad things have happened, and how this is not the original state. But if the Bible is true, the Bible does claim that the whole entire world was flooded by a giant flood that killed off most everything on the earth, except a few land animals that were on Noah's Ark. And if that's true, we should see evidence for that. Do you know of any evidence for it? When you look at a dinosaur, do you say, oh, that's Noah's flood? Or do you say, oh, that's evolution? You've probably never heard anyone interpret dinosaurs in light of Noah's flood before, but check this out. You've seen dinosaurs in this posture before? Yeah, if you've ever seen a dinosaur fossil, and if it's an intact dinosaur fossil, almost all of them are in this pose. Remember the original Jurassic Park movie? The opening scene, they did the boom on the ground, they had this computer did this image of a velociraptor, and he's like this. Right there on the screen. It's such a common theme in paleontology that people didn't even think about it until they started saying, okay, now why are they in this pose? And no one could figure it out. They said, oh, he's suffocated. Asphyxiation was the big answer. So in other words, he's going, no one was happy with that because dead things get floppy. And then about 2 summers ago, some scientists were studying chickens. And they realized if you take a dead chicken and put it in water, it does that. I said, what on earth? And so they started looking at the anatomy and said, oh, of course, there's this thing that everyone's already known about. It's called the ligamentum elasticum. It's a giant ligament that runs from the base of the skull all the way down the spine and down the tail of long-necked and long-tailed animals. But if you take an animal in air, like a big, brachiosaurus, he doesn't have to hold his head up with muscles. He's got a giant rubber band, so boing, boing, boing. That's pretty smart. That's good design. What happens when you take that animal with his rubber band under tension and put him in water? And he drowns. He doesn't weigh as much, right? But the rubber band is still pulling, right? Boing. Now, the evolutionary paleontologists are looking at the classic dead dinosaur posture that they acknowledge exists, say this is evidence of drowning. So we must ask the question, how come when we find an intact dinosaur that's a land animal, almost all cases, he looks like he drowned? Are dinosaurs in the Bible? The word's not, right? Why is the word not in the Bible? Well, because the word didn't exist till 1841. And English translations of the Bible have been around since 1400s. Maybe earlier. Was Wycliffe 1300s? King James 1600s? It's a long time before the word dinosaur was invented. So it could not be in any of the older Bibles and English traditions. We wouldn't have just changed a word radically like that. But there is a word in Scripture that's very strange. It's called tanin. Sometimes translated sea monster, sometimes translated jackal. But essentially, the Hebrews believed in giant scaly lizardy things. And so did almost every major culture group on earth. Almost all around the world, if you go and you look at their old stories, they've got stories of big lizards, not stories of giant wolves. Now, the Australians had stories of giant wombats, and everybody laughed at them because wombats are only this big. And then they found the bones of giant wombats in the fossil records and said, oh, look at that. Wait a minute. How come these guys saw giant wombats? They died out hundreds of thousands or at least tens of thousands of years ago. Or maybe not. Well, if we look in the Bible for some hints here, I would turn to Job chapter 40 first. Now, this is a very odd passage. Now, I'm not saying that Job's talking about an Ankylosaurus. I just like the picture, so I stuck it there. Job 40, here's God chastising Job for everything Job doesn't know. And he says, behold, behemoth. Irk! Come on, Christian. What do you do when you see a non-English word in your English translation? You translate it, right? What does behemoth mean? It means beast of beasts. Behold the beast of beasts, which I made as I made you. Now that's either in the same way I made you or Creation Week, Day 6. He eats grass like an ox. He's an herbivore. His strength's in his loins, power in the muscle of his belly. He's a very strong animal. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. That's a very odd phrase. Like a cedar. There's cedar trees around here, right? They're probably scrubby little things that grow up in old fields, right? Maybe a couple really old houses might have a cedar tree that's kind of big, but not usually bigger than that big around. A cedar tree to us is not impressive. But when God used that word, he was pointing Job to the largest trees in the Middle East. In American context, if God had said, he's got a tail like a sequoia, you know exactly what that would mean in cultural context. But here, the cultural context, this is the biggest tree. There's about 40 different trees mentioned in Scripture. The cedars of Lebanon are the largest trees anywhere around. And so, I don't know that Job 40 is talking about a sauropod dinosaur. You cannot know this. But if you're looking around to say, okay, what animal is God describing here? And you're looking around modern animals and extinct animals, the largest land animals that God created were the sauropod dinosaurs. They deserve the title beast of beasts. They were herbivores, they were really strong, and they had a giant tail. That's kind of cool. But wait a second. Come on, Carter, do you think that there was really a Noah's Ark and a Noah's flood? How did Noah fit those things on the ark? Well, we can answer several ways. First of all, 50 basic kinds of dinosaur, right? Within each kind, there are small species and large species. Here's Compsognathus. He's the size of a chicken, full grown. Second, even the largest dinosaurs came from eggs, and the biggest dinosaur egg ever discovered is smaller than an ostrich egg. So something that would have a hard time fitting in this room started out inside something this big. Now, I don't think God would have brought eggs to Noah, but he brought the animals to Noah. He could have brought babies. He could have brought juveniles. He could have brought teenagers. He doesn't have to take great-great-great-great-granddaddy Apatosaurus. Or he could have, because the ark is large enough. I'll show that in 2 slides from now. But we also have to ask this question. How many dinosaurs would Noah have had to take on the ark? 2 of each kind, right? How many basic kinds are there? 50. 2 times 50 is 100. And there's enough room for even the largest ones. Plus all the food, plus all the water they need for an entire year. That's cool, isn't it? And yet, it just gets easier if you take smaller ones. Then we must ask the question, what happened to the dinosaurs? Well, I like to point out that all of the largest land animals that ever existed are now extinct. Why? Because ecological pressures. Large animals are always at a greater risk of extinction. To get large means you have to wait until you have babies, which means you have a greater chance of dying before you reproduce. To get large means you need lots of food, which means you can't survive climate change. Any kind of climate cycling, the first thing that goes extinct is the big animals, not the mice. In fact, elephants are probably going to go extinct one day. Mice never will. So that might right there explain what happened to the dinosaurs. I'm not certain. There's lots of ideas. But maybe actually they did not go extinct a very, very long time ago. There's some intriguing evidence in the archaeological record. This is a tomb. It's in England. It's in Carlisle Cathedral on the floor. The bishop here was buried in the floor of the cathedral 600 years ago. This is a long time before we discovered dinosaurs. And you see the rectangle that goes around the tomb? There's all these animals carved in it. And in that rectangle is this. Okay, do you agree with me here? That is a bat, a dog, specific breed of dog, isn't it? There's a fish, and there's a bird. Those are really good pictures, right? It's not just like a kindergartner drawing with crayon. That's a really good depiction of an aquatic wading bird. Then why is it that close to these things is that? That looks like two sauropod dinosaurs with their necks wrapped around each other. And the guy on the left has spikes on his tail. There's only one species of sauropod dinosaur we know of that has spikes on his tail. And close to that is this thing. I'm not sure what that is. But it's not a pig. It's not a horse. It's very reptilian looking. It's got big teeth. Almost like a stegosaur, but his head is too big and it doesn't have any plates on his back. But that's really curious. What on earth were they trying to draw? But you know, this two sauropod dinosaurs with their necks wrapped around each other is a very common motif in ancient history. Where did people get this idea? And if they're inventing mythological monsters, how come so many of them look like things you're familiar with? This is from a carving of a temple in a famous temple complex in Cambodia called Angkor Wat. This is carved many hundreds of years before modern people discovered dinosaurs. What is that? Sure looks like a stegosaur to me. Now, it's not perfect. His head's a little off. His body proportions are a little... Come on. Just above it is a water buffalo, and it doesn't even look like a water buffalo. That's a really good depiction of a stegosaur carved in the rock by someone who's never supposed to have seen one. How do you invent mythological things that look like real things? That's the question. All right, let me answer this next question. Was there an age of dinosaurs? I've seen pictures like that. Look at that. There's no birds. There's no mammals. There's no grass. That's the funniest thing about paleontology. I was taught that grasses didn't evolve until 35 million years ago. And evolutionary numbers there, that's fine. But I'm also told that dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. So dinosaurs never saw grass. And yet when they started studying dinosaur dung, that's an amazing statement in itself. We have thousands upon thousands of petrified dinosaur piles. Have you ever gone out in your backyard and tripped over a fossilized cow patty or a dog mess? No, this stuff turns to mush really quickly and disintegrates really quickly. Why do we have thousands upon thousands of fossilized dinosaur dung piles? Something really weird happened in the past. Something buried it and petrified it quickly, or it would turn to mush. But when they start looking at them, how was this for a job? I study dinosaur dung. And what they do is they take it, cut it in half, polish it, and look at it under a microscope. And lo and behold, all of the families of modern grasses were being eaten by dinosaurs, even though they don't exist anywhere else in the fossil record. That's a giant puzzle. The fossil record is finicky, and sometimes it throws us some curveballs. That is not true. But I remember as a young man looking at things like this and being absolutely convinced that evolution was true. Look at that. How can anyone doubt evolution, I said. Evolution's a fact, I said. This is the family tree of dinosaurs going all the way back to a common ancestor through geological time. Isn't that all the proof you need that evolution is true? Well, I thought so. Actually, I got this from one of our speakers in Australia. He said, "Hey, Rob, look what happens when you cover up everything they don't actually know." Oh, you've heard of the missing link, right? Between man and monkeys? There are missing links between almost every group of animal and almost every group of other group of animal throughout the entire fossil record, including amongst all the dinosaurs. That's really funny. But then you start throwing in the mammals. They found a Mesozoic thing that looked like a flying squirrel. There's a platypus jaw. Platypus teeth, and that groove in the jaw, that's for the giant nerve that runs the platypus bill. Now, we are told that dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. That means platypuses were living with dinosaurs the entire time dinosaurs were alive. This badger-like creature, they found it. He's got a baby Psittacosaurus in his stomach. So in the morning of Noah's flood, this mammal ate a dinosaur for breakfast. Here's a beaver-like creature. His hairs are preserved in the rocks. This is a hedgehog. I know that the scientists said hedgehog-like, but hedgehogs have distinctive hairs. The only animals in the world that have hedgehog hairs are hedgehogs. And that fossil was preserved with his hairs, and they look just like hedgehog hairs, in the same shape as a hedgehog, the same size. That's funny because most things in a fossil record that are continuing today are bigger. That platypus is twice as big as a modern platypus. Penguins in a fossil record are almost 6 feet tall. But that hedgehog is a hedgehog. Now this guy, amazing fossil. This is what they used to call a mammal-like reptile. Until they started studying more and more of them, they realized, wait a minute, this isn't reptile-like at all. This, in fact, is a mammal. Look at his teeth, his arms, his ribs, his long tail. It's as mammal-like as you can get. It is a mammal. But based on where they found this in the fossil record, they said that mammals must have originated at least in late Triassic. No, Triassic. You've all seen Jurassic Park, right? Has anyone else in here been absolutely annoyed that none of those are Jurassic animals? Those are all Cretaceous animals. It drives me crazy. Come on, a Cretaceous Park. Here's the evolutionary timeline. They have the Cretaceous, Cretaceous, before that's Jurassic, to Triassic. They're saying that mammals must have existed here, which means that mammals existed the entire time the dinosaurs existed, which is funny because that's what I've always believed. But let's hit birds. You've heard, no doubt, that most scientists believe that birds evolved from dinosaurs. There are birds in the fossil record with feathers. Do you see the feathers on this Confuciusornis? He's an amazing bird. He's got wing claws, though. A lot of the ancient birds had wing claws, but so does one modern bird. Here's a Hoatzin of South America. He's got claws on his wings. They're very functional. Hoatzin also has some other strange, weird things about him. I won't talk about that. Here's Hongshanornis longcresta. Supposedly 125 million years ago, this guy lived. He's got a beak up on the top there. You see that brown smudge in the rocks? That's the color from his tail feathers. That's cool. Here's Enchiornis huxleyi, named after a good friend of Charles Darwin, Mr. Huxley. You see the feathers? Can feathers be preserved in rocks, yes or no? Yeah. Okay, the uncomfortable question. Did dinosaurs have feathers? Is the obvious next question, right? You know, when I answer this question in a minute, I'm going to tell you I don't care. The Bible doesn't say that dinosaurs did not have feathers. So if they discover that dinosaurs really did have feathers, okay, I'll take that. At the moment, though, there's no evidence like birds with feathers. This is amazing, the feathers. How do you preserve feathers in rocks? That means that the rock had the form before the feather decayed, right? That's an interesting fact. So if we would look at where they found mammals and birds in the fossil record, this is what I was taught in graduate school even. Mammals and birds didn't evolve to the end of the dinosaur era. But now we find mammals throughout the entire record of dinosaurs, and birds are very deep also. Now I put a question mark there because we don't really have that many birds, and we keep finding more. And they keep pushing the origin of birds deeper and deeper into the fossil record. So if birds evolved from dinosaurs, the evolutionist is running out of time. And that's a very curious thing. But let's ask a question. Did dinosaurs have feathers? This is Sinosauropteryx. He's the poster child of the feathered dinosaurs. You see that brown fuzzy thing that runs down the back of his back? Well, that was like feathers. Boom. This is 10 or 15 years now. They're beating us over the head with this guy. But a couple of years ago, some other scientists went back and they re-examined the fossil, and they said that fuzzy stuff is underneath the animal's skin. It's just decayed tissue. And I quote, "It is obvious to anyone who looks." Why was it not obvious to the first people who looked? Because they really wanted to find evidence of dinosaurs with feathers. Now, there's a lot more evidence that actually suggests that dinosaurs did have some things sticking up out of their skin, and I'm fine with that. But really, the reason they really want dinosaurs to have feathers is because they want to say the birds are far from dinosaurs. So here's one more bit of evidence. The bottom, this is a turkey vulture wing. Do you see those bumps, the third one down there? Do you see the bumps on the bone? Those knobs are formed by the muscles pulling on the bone that are attached to the feathers, because the feathers in a bird, they stick up sometimes, right, when they're flying. They're called quill knobs. It's diagnostic of a flying bird. Penguins don't have them. Ostriches don't have them. In fact, albatrosses don't have them. Albatrosses don't stick their feathers up when they're coming in for a landing, so they tend to crash into the ground. But once they get airborne, they're like a glider, and they can stay airborne for weeks without touching the ground. Other birds can't do that. They're not as aerodynamically efficient. So and albatrosses don't have quill knobs. So the evidence of a quill knob means the bird actively flew. So looking for quill knobs on dinosaurs, though, they find things like this. Those upper two things there, that's from a velociraptor. The grayish picture, there's a bunch of arrows there. You can't even see them. These arrows are here, 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 and right there's a little teeny bump. Can you see the bump? You can? I see these bumps. These are tiny. These might be quill knobs. They might be. Velociraptor might have had feathers. But that's the evidence. And the evidence is not good enough for me to claim that dinosaurs unequivocally had feathers. But again, if they did, so what? It's just an interesting scientific fact. Now, this was discovered just a couple of months ago. This is a challenge. These are feathers. They're found in amber from Burma, which is dated to the time of dinosaurs. They found a little end of a tail in there, which is a short tail. And they said it's too long for a bird. 'Cause you know birds have tails, right? You've eaten chicken. What's on the rear end of a chicken? This little teeny thing. It's called a pygostyle. There's a couple of bones in it. And that's it. If a bird has a tail, it's feathers sticking off this little nub on the end of their spinal cord. Dinosaurs, though, had long, bony tails. And so they found this thing that says it's too long for a bird. It's got to be a dinosaur. And look at these feathers. But we have big problems with this fossil because the scientists did not find it in the ground. They bought it at a market. And for hundreds of years, we know that people have been fraudulently melting amber and letting it cool off again and sticking things in it while it was melted. Now that does change the color of the amber, but they're getting better and better and smarter and smarter. And plus, what if this is a bird? So I know this is big international news, but as an entire organization, we thought through this a lot. We threw ideas around what this could be, and we basically said, we don't want to touch this because we don't trust the fossil itself. But maybe it is feathers. I mean, maybe it is feathers from a dinosaur. I just don't think so. Okay. None of what I told you just now matters. I am not threatened by feathered dinosaurs if they really had feathers. And there's a lot more information I skipped over. I am not threatened by it because I know that dinosaur fossils cannot be millions of years old. And if they're not millions of years old, then evolution's irrelevant. And I can demonstrate they're not millions of years old by just examining the bones. These are some electron microscope images that two friends of mine, I actually published in an evolutionary journal. The first author there, he instantly got fired by the University of California system when this paper got published. Oh well. These are the insides of a triceratops horn. Those are delicate bone matrix that disintegrates over time. You've probably found an old bone in the field that's hollow, right? Because the stuff in it just turns to powder. And yet it's still intact in this supposedly 70-million-year-old dinosaur. In the middle, on the right, those blobs with the spikes in the bottom on the right, those are bone cells. Those are osteoblasts. The cells are still intact inside a dinosaur horn that's been sitting in the ground for millions of years. I can't leave a ham sandwich on the counter for a week before it starts turning green. Could I bury a pig in my backyard and find it thousands of years later? No. I'm incredulous. I am having a hard time accepting that these guys died in Noah's flood, which is more than 4,500 years ago. But if I'm struggling to accept this, what is the evolutionist saying? Essentially, they're throwing out everything we know about experimental science and how fast things rot and break down in the ground. And so now I'm holding on to science and they're rejecting science, and I think that's really humorous. But it gets better than that. This material came from the inside of a Tyrannosaurus rex leg bone. The outside of the leg was petrified, the inside was not. It still stank. You ever see the movie The Mummy? Remember when they open up the sarcophagus? He's like, ooh, he's gooey. Remember that? Why were they surprised that the mummy was gooey after thousands of years in the ground? Because he should have dried out. He's in a desert. Same thing here. It's gooey. It's stinky. It's flexible. There's meat. There's flexible tissue, blood vessels, red blood cells. This is crazy. This should not be there. And yet it is. And it could not be there over millions of years. But that same laboratory produced this a couple of years ago. These are pictures of microscope images of dinosaur cells. And they took the dinosaur cells and they stained them with a stain that stains DNA. Those are those two green spots. So look, not only did they stain what looks like the nucleus, but it means the cell is intact, the nucleus is intact, and there's intact DNA inside the dinosaur bone. This is not supposed to be true. Especially because we know bacteria live in dinosaur bones. And bacteria eat everything. So they should have eaten this stuff millions of years ago. But even if they didn't, there might be bacteria in this bone. Maybe it's bacterial DNA. Well, that's what these two pictures are for. They stained other cells with a stain for a protein that bacteria don't have. It's a protein that you have. It's a protein that dinosaurs would have had, because reptiles have it. It's called a histone. It's a protein in your nucleus that your DNA wraps around. And bacteria don't have it. That looks like intact dinosaur DNA. Now, I'm the geneticist. You don't know that yet. I'll tell you next time. This is my field. This cannot be true. Everything I know about laboratory science tells me the DNA breaks down very rapidly. These stains, there should have been nothing there. In fact, proteins break down rapidly. There should have been nothing for them to stain after that much time. Even better, carbon-14. Dinosaur bones contain carbon-14. So do diamonds, amber, coal, natural gas. The plastic of my mouse clicker thing here, which came out of oil, they say is 300 million years old, this thing has carbon-14 in it. But if the entire Earth was one giant ball of carbon-14, it would disintegrate in less than 1 million years. There would be 0 atoms left after 1 million years. That's how fast it breaks down. Nothing with carbon-14 in it can be millions of years old. How come dinosaur bones have carbon-14 in them? Evolution's not true. Now, I skipped over some of these points, but let's look over what we have learned here. First, dinosaurs tell us about God's creativity. His amazing genius in engineering feats, because he created things that are still, engineers look at a brontosaurus and like, how on earth can this guy walk? How can he breathe? What's the blood pressure in his neck? It is shocking, the amazing engineering challenges that God overcame when he built these animals. Also, though, his genius and creativity and all the diversity that he created within each group. But dinosaurs also tell us about the fall. We see animals that were originally herbivores, some of which left their original state after God cursed the world, after things fell into sin, after creation. Dinosaurs also tell us about the flood. Those amazing dinosaurs are buried in water, shouldn't be there. Therefore, dinosaurs also tell us about God's judgment. God sent that flood as a judgment on wickedness. And the animals that we see there were not the ones he created early on. It was 1,500 years later when the earth had become so wicked and all these animals and people had left what they originally created to do and doing things that are bad, violent. And so God said, whoosh, and he restarted. But dinosaurs also tell us about God's providence, because there's lots of evidence that dinosaurs did survive the flood and that man did interact with dinosaurs. Which, now, I do believe they're extinct today. God did not promise that all things would live forever. But it was the flood and Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark was a general providence to get things to the other side, to show us not that species won't go extinct, but it's an example of faith and the fact that to survive the wrath of God, you have to have faith in God, just like Noah did. And the dinosaurs happen to be carried along through that. You see, put all those things together, and I kind of mumbled it a little bit here, but all these things together, dinosaurs actually can be used to preach the gospel. And when you're talking to people, if you say, I'm a Christian, they're going to say, oh, come on, you don't believe in evolution? Now, granted, a lot of Christians don't believe in creation. I understand that. But if you want to say, I'm a Christian, I believe the Bible, they say, you don't believe in evolution? What about dinosaurs? What are you going to tell them? What's the first thing you're going to say? Oh, I know about dinosaurs. You know what I like to do? Say, they found carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. That means it can't be millions of years old. Head rattles. I say, they found DNA in dinosaur bones. That means it can't be millions of years old. Those two things right there is like bam, bam. Great arguments. We've got fantastic arguments on things that we did not think we'd be able to even address 10 years ago. And all of a sudden, miraculously, all this information comes up. If you want more information on this, take a look at our Creation magazine. We regularly run dinosaur articles and any other field of science also you'll find in there. Here's a really cool book, Untold Secrets of Planet Earth, Dire Dragons. The author went all over the world taking photographs of artwork, carvings, paintings of dragons. And then he had an artist draw a picture of a known species of dinosaur in the same pose as the artwork. And there's some really, really interesting things in there. I mean, fascinating things. We also have a new book right next to it. It's called The Untold Secrets of Planet Earth, Flood Fossils. And there's fantastic information. There's things I had no idea. Like, we have all of these examples of petrified trees in the fossil record, and a lot of them are squished into an oval. They're not round. Why? That means the tree was buried under a tremendous amount of pressure. Oh, that means that it's not slow and gradual. This has to be a catastrophic burial to very, very deep things for the tree to be squished and petrified. In fact, possibly the pressure is what drove the minerals into the tree. Petrification is something that scientists do not know how happens today. Even today, we don't know how things petrify. Here's a really cool kids book, Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibbs. It's got this little cricket character. And he goes through all these questions that children naturally ask about fossils, dinosaurs, the age of the earth, the biblical flood. There's some really, really good material in there. And right next to it is also another brand new book, Exploring Dinosaurs with Mr. Hibb. So you got a kid who's asking questions. In fact, adult, I learned stuff in this book. It's actually an adult book with a little cricket character to help us understand what it's talking about. Okay. Good stuff in there. Here's Dragons of the Deep by Dr. Carl Wieland. I'm not even sure if we carry it, if I'm carrying it today, but it's a fantastic book about the aquatic reptiles. They're not dinosaurs because they don't have legs, but the giant things like the mosasaurs and the plesiosaurs, fascinating things in the water. Really cool documentary, Dragons or Dinosaurs. I didn't want to be in this, but I was made to be in this. My boss said, hey, Rob, there's some guys coming next week. You're going to be in a documentary. I said, on what? He goes, Dragons or Dinosaurs? I said, no. He said, why not? I said, because too many people have said too many hokey things about dragons and dinosaurs, and I don't want to be associated with that. He said, well, they're coming. You just do your best. So they sat me down in front of the camera. I said, it can't be this and it can't be that. Don't say that. That's a mistake. You really got to say it this way. And it turns out, I didn't know, but that's what they were looking for, and I've got more FaceTime than the other 15 people they interviewed. So I can highly recommend this. It's a fantastic resource. And I'm going to leave you with 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. My friends, we can stand tall and we can stand confident. We don't have to be snarky. We don't have to be jerks. but we can answer point for point and throw some curveballs that someone who believes in evolution doesn't necessarily see coming. And honestly, I think carbon-14 and DNA dinosaur bones are the best ones to use. But I'll leave you with that, and I'll see you here in 15 minutes or so. Thank you very much.